You people always disappear when the guests actually arrive. Winnie didn't even blink. She kept her eyes on the clipboard. I'm not hotel staff, she said evenly. I'm the restoration consultant. If there's an issue, you can speak to a consultant. Seo Yuna cut in, letting the word drag out like an insult she was tasting. Then act like one. Smile when you speak to guests. Winnie finally looked up. Not offended. Just done explaining herself. I am working, she said. Excuse me. And she went back to her notes. That should have ended it. But it didn't. Because Yuna wasn't interested in ending things. She stepped closer. Close enough that it turned into a performance now. Is that even real? She said, eyes narrowing slightly. Before Winnie could even process the shift, Yuna reached out and touched her hair. The room didn't react immediately. Winnie did. She stepped back at once, clean, precise, controlled. Her head lifted slowly. And when she spoke, the softness was gone. Please don't touch me again. It wasn't loud, but it cut. A few guests nearby turned their heads. Not fully. Just enough to feel it. Yuna noticed. And smiled because she noticed. That was worse. Oh, relax, she said lightly, as if correcting a child. Then she reached again. Harder this time. That was when Winnie moved. Her hand snapped forward, caught Yuna's wrist midair, and stopped it cold. Not a slap. Not a shove. A stop. Firm. Controlled. Final. Winnie lowered her wrist slowly. And this time, her voice didn't carry softness at all. I told you not to touch me. Silence didn't build. It fell. Heavy. Immediate. A chair scraped somewhere behind them. Someone's breath caught. And across the ballroom, Kong Minjae slowly put down his glass. If you think that was just disrespect, you haven't seen anything yet. Because at that moment, she didn't just touch a woman. She triggered the one man in that room who never raises his voice. And when he finally moves, nobody in that ballroom is going to stay the same. If this is your first time here, subscribe and stay with me. 3 months earlier, Winnie hadn't known his name. She had known his shoes first, dark, expensive, understated, completely still in a space where everyone else moved. She'd been up on the second-level scaffold reviewing a section of damaged cornice work when she noticed him standing below on the ballroom floor, hands clasped behind his back, watching. Not the restoration. Her. She climbed down. Can I help you? She asked, pulling off one work glove. The East Arch, he said. His English was precise, unhurried. You're preserving the original stone. That's correct. The investors want it modernized. I know what the investors want. She looked at him evenly. The original stone is Joseon-era granite. It was shipped from a quarry that no longer exists. Once it's gone, it's gone. I recommended preservation. The committee agreed. He was quiet for a moment. You disagreed with the investment group. I disagreed with bad decision-making, she said. The investment group eventually came around. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that, like a door opening a crack and then stopping. Kong Minjae, he said. She shook his hand. Winnie Alfred. He came back 2 days later. Then 3 days after that. Always alone, always in that same dark suit, always with the same stillness that made the workers around him visibly nervous in ways they tried to hide. Winnie noticed the nervousness before she understood its source. She noticed the way the site manager straightened up when Minjae entered. The way the junior architects found reasons to be somewhere else. She didn't ask. She just watched. On his 4th visit, he arrived at 7 in the evening when most of the crew had gone home, and Winnie was still on site reviewing structural drawings under a construction lamp. He set a coffee on the table beside her without asking if she wanted one. She looked at it. Then at him. Black, he said. I assumed. You assumed correctly. She picked it up. Why do you keep coming back? He considered the question. You work differently than other consultants. How so? You argue back. She looked at him over the rim of the cup. Is that unusual for you? More than you'd think. They talked for 2 hours that night. Not about the restoration. About architecture as memory. About what it meant to preserve a thing rather than replace it. Minjae spoke carefully, like a man who had learned to measure words before releasing them. But when Winnie pushed on something, when she challenged an idea or complicated a point, he didn't retreat. He leaned in. He matched her. That was the night she started paying attention to him differently. She also started noticing the other things more clearly. The way two men in dark clothes were always positioned near whatever entrance Min-jae used. The way restaurant managers appeared from nowhere when he walked in. The way a senior government official at a site review meeting had visibly paled when he realized Min-jae was in the room. She asked one of the site managers about it on a Thursday, casually, over lunch. The man looked at his food for a long moment before answering. The Kong family, he said. They have businesses. Many businesses. A pause. Not all of them are the kind you ask questions about. Winnie didn't say anything. She finished her lunch. That evening, when Min-jae arrived at the site, she was quieter than usual. He noticed within 10 minutes. He always noticed. Something changed, he said. I asked about your family. He didn't react. And? I got vague answers, she said. Which isn't really an answer. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he might leave without responding. Then he said, walk with me. They walked the perimeter of the hotel's outer courtyard. The city hummed quietly beyond the walls. My family controls things, he said finally. Businesses. Supply chains. Certain political relationships. A pause. And other things. Darker things. Yes. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what that means, she said. And I'm not going to pretend it doesn't matter. I know. So why are you telling me? He looked at her for a moment. Because you asked. And because no one asks me things directly anymore. He exhaled slowly. Everyone either wants something from me or is afraid of me. You're neither. Winnie looked up at the sky. The Seoul night was hazy and lit orange from below. Power doesn't scare me, she said. Cruelty does. He didn't respond. But she saw something move across his face, something she hadn't seen there before. Not relief, exactly. Something older than relief. Like a man who had carried something heavy for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down, and had just been reminded. They kept walking. They went to dinner once in a quiet riverside restaurant. A man at a nearby table raised his voice at a waitress, sharp and humiliating. Before Winnie could react, Min-jae looked up. Just once. The man saw him and went silent immediately. Not angry. Afraid. He left the restaurant minutes later without finishing his meal. Winnie didn't speak at first. Then she said quietly, you didn't even say anything. Min-jae replied, I didn't have to. The dinner started after that. Quiet places where no one photographed anyone. Late-night calls that began as work-related and gradually stopped pretending. She learned that he slept badly and read history books in the hours before dawn. He learned that she had left a prestigious London firm at 28 because she'd refused to sign off on the demolition of a 19th century building to make room for a parking structure, and had never once regretted it. She made him laugh exactly twice in the first month. Both times, he looked slightly surprised at himself afterward. One night at the restoration site, Winnie fell asleep at her desk. Blueprints still open. Pen in her hand. Min-jae arrived and paused when he saw her. He quietly removed the pen from her fingers, then placed his coat over her shoulders so she wouldn't feel the cold. He didn't wake her. He just sat across from her and stayed there until she woke up. She stopped pulling back emotionally. And Min-jae, for the first time in years, started looking like a man who was somewhere he actually wanted to be. Which was exactly what Seo Yuna saw on the night of the engagement dinner. And exactly what she couldn't stand. Min-jae had asked her 3 weeks before the dinner. They were on the phone late, past midnight. Winnie was lying on her couch with her shoes off and her notes for the following day spread across the coffee table. My cousin is getting engaged, he said. There's a formal dinner. I'd like you to come. She was quiet for a moment. As what? As the person I want beside me. She stared at the ceiling. Min-jae, I know what those rooms are like. I know you do. And you still want to bring me into one? Yes. Why? A pause. Because I'm tired of pretending the things that matter to me don't exist. His voice was even, but something underneath it wasn't. You matter to me. That's not a thing I'm willing to keep in a separate room anymore. Winnie closed her eyes briefly. You know it won't be easy, she said. Nothing worth keeping ever is. She came to the dinner. She dressed carefully, not to impress, but to give no one anything easy to say. She arrived with her shoulders back and her eyes open and her expression carrying the calm she'd spent years building. The room noticed her before she'd taken 10 steps inside. Not loudly. Just that particular silence that moves through a crowd when something unexpected enters. Eyes that didn't quite look away fast enough. Conversations that briefly lost their rhythm. Min-jae was at her side. And Winnie noticed what she always noticed in spaces like this, that he moved differently when she was with him. Less like a man managing a room and more like a man who had somewhere he actually wanted to stand. Yuna noticed it too. She had been watching from the moment they walked in together. Winnie could feel the attention before she identified its source. It had a particular texture, not curiosity. Something colder. Something that had already made up its mind. Yuna waited until Min-jae had been pulled into a conversation with a group of family elders and investors near the center of the room. Then she crossed toward Winnie with that slow, deliberate walk, and the rest followed the way it always does when someone has made a decision they've disguised as an impulse. Now Winnie's hand was still wrapped around Yuna's wrist. The ballroom was completely silent. Yuna's face had gone through shock and was currently arriving at something uglier, the look of a woman who had just realized she was losing something she had assumed she couldn't lose. Her composure. She shoved me, Yuna said loudly, pivoting toward the room, toward the approaching footsteps she could hear without turning around. She put her hands on me. Did she touch you after you told her not to? Min-jae's voice was quiet. That was the worst part. There was no anger in it. Just a question, asked with the flat certainty of a man who already knew the answer and was asking it for the room's benefit, not his own. Yuna stopped talking. He was standing 3 feet away. He had not raised his voice. He had not touched anyone. He was just standing there, and the quality of his stillness was the most frightening thing in the room. He was not looking at Yuna. He was looking at Winnie. Did she touch you after you told her not to? He asked again. Winnie met his eyes. Yes. The silence that followed was the kind that presses against eardrums. Min-jae turned toward his aunt. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room was so quiet that a normal speaking voice carried to every corner, and everyone in it understood they were watching something that would be talked about in careful whispers for a long time afterward. You were warned to keep your hands off her, he said. Yuna's mouth opened. I will not tolerate anyone humiliating my guest. A pause. Not in this room. Not in any room connected to this family. Not ever again. Yuna stood there. For a moment she looked less like a wealthy woman in an expensive dress and more like a person who had just realized they had made an irreversible mistake. The guests nearest to her were not looking at her. They were looking at the floor, at their glasses, anywhere. That particular mercy people extend when they cannot bear to watch someone be exposed. Yuna left without another word. The music resumed. Conversations restarted slowly, carefully, like engines turning over in cold weather. Min-jae turned back to Winnie. Something had shifted in his face. The coldness was still there, but behind it, something that looked almost like pain. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Winnie straightened. Yes, but her hands were not entirely steady, and he saw it, and neither of them pretended he hadn't. He drove her home himself. The city slid past the windows in long streaks of amber and white. Neither of them spoke for the first several minutes. The silence between them had learned to be comfortable, but tonight it had weight. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what exactly? For bringing you somewhere that happened. Winnie looked out the window. You didn't touch my hair, Min-jae. No, but I knew my family. I knew what was possible, and I told you to trust me, and then I was across the room when he stopped. His jaw was tight. I should have been closer. I didn't need you to save me, Winnie said. She turned to look at him. I needed you not to stay silent. Those are different things. He kept his eyes on the road. I know. Do you? A pause. When I started walking toward you, he said, I was managing something. Inside. Because there was a version of what I wanted to do at that moment that would have made things significantly worse. Winnie watched the side of his face. How bad does it get? Your world. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Bad enough that I stopped letting people close to me, he said. Because the closer someone is, the more available they become to everything around me. I've watched this family destroy things it couldn't control and absorb things it could. He exhaled. You're neither. And that puts you in a position I don't have a map for. Winnie was quiet for a moment. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me. I'm aware. The car slowed to a stop outside her building. The street was quiet. Overhead, a street lamp buzzed faintly. Min-jae looked at her. Will you still see me after tonight? Winnie held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her purse and opened the car door, and just before she stepped out, she looked back at him with a small, certain smile. Yes, she said. And she was gone. The family dinner 3 weeks later was smaller and therefore more dangerous. Just Min-jae's parents, 2 cousins, and Yuna, who arrived looking like a woman who had rehearsed being gracious and wasn't entirely confident in the performance. She greeted Winnie with a tight smile and said nothing offensive for the first 40 minutes, which felt like its own kind of warning. Chairman Kang was not what Winnie had expected. She had prepared for the cold. She had prepared for the particular brand of politeness that is really just hostility in formal clothes. Instead, she found a man in his early 60s who poured her tea before his own wife's and asked her 3 precise questions about architectural restoration that told her immediately he had looked her up before she arrived. The Hanam Grand Project, he said. You refused to demolish the original arch. The investors wanted efficiency, Winnie said. I wanted accuracy. And you were right. I usually am about buildings. Something crossed his face. Approval, maybe. Or its ancestor. It was Yuna who couldn't sustain the performance. It started small, a comment about how unusual Winnie's career path must have been, with emphasis on unusual that carried a freight of meaning beneath it. Then something about how challenging it must be, working in environments where one didn't always have natural relationships. Each sentence deniable on its own. Together, they built something uglier. Winnie set down her chopsticks. Yuna, she began. You embarrass this family every time you speak like that. Chairman Kang's voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It had the quality of something that doesn't need volume because it has never needed it. The table went still. Yuna turned to look at her brother with an expression Winnie would not forget, the expression of someone who had expected anything except this. Father. I am not speaking to you as your brother right now, Chairman Kang said. I am speaking to you as the head of this family. And what I am telling you is that I am finished watching you use our table as a place to practice your bitterness. Yuna's face went pale. If you had spent a fraction of the energy you spend resenting others on building something of your own, he continued, quietly, devastatingly, perhaps you would understand why you remain alone. The words landed in the room and stayed there. Yuna rose from the table without a word and left. No one moved for several seconds. Then Min-jae's mother quietly refilled Winnie's tea, and the conversation resumed with the careful, deliberate normalcy of people who had decided together that the evening would continue. Later, when the dinner had ended and Min-jae was in the hallway with his cousins, Chairman Kang stopped beside Winnie near the entrance. My son, he said, without preamble, has not looked peaceful in years. He glanced toward the hallway where Min-jae stood. Until recently. Winnie didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Chairman Kang nodded once, the way men do when they've said the thing they came to say, and walked away. What no one talked about was what Yuna had given up. Winnie learned it in pieces from Min-jae mostly, in those late-night conversations where the careful parts of him went quiet and the real parts spoke. How Yuna had spent her 30s managing the family's social relationships, smoothing over conflicts, maintaining alliances, doing the invisible labor of keeping a powerful family looking presentable while the men made decisions and got credit for them. How she had set aside a relationship she'd cared about because the family disapproved of the man's background. How she had poured herself into the Kang name until there wasn't much of Co Yuna left underneath it, and then looked up one day to find that no one had noticed the sacrifice because no one had asked for it. She's been angry for a long time, Min-jae said one night. At everything that has what she doesn't. Space. Recognition. Peace. Winnie was quiet for a moment. And I walked in looking like all 3. Yes. She stared at the ceiling. That doesn't excuse it. No, it doesn't. But it explains it. Yes. Winnie closed her eyes. The anger she had carried since the ballroom hadn't disappeared. But it had shifted, made room for something more complicated. She understood bitterness. She understood what happened to people when they poured themselves into systems that were never going to pour anything back. She understood it, even if she refused to become it. The call came on a Tuesday. Min-jae's voice was controlled in the way it got when he was managing something internally. Yuna collapsed. She's at the house. The doctor is coming, but she a pause. She's asking for no one, which means she needs someone. You're the calmest person I know. Winnie was already standing up. I'm on my way. She found Yuna on the floor of the sitting room, conscious but glassy-eyed, her breathing shallow and uneven. The housekeeper was hovering in the doorway. A glass and 2 empty pill bottles were on the side table. Not intentional, Winnie could tell from the positioning, from the look on Yuna's face, which was shame rather than resolution. Alcohol and anxiety medication, taken without tracking either. Winnie sat on the floor beside her. She didn't say anything. She just pressed 2 fingers to Yuna's wrist, monitoring her pulse, watching her breathing, keeping her own face entirely steady. The way she did on job sites when something went wrong and she knew that the most useful thing she could be was calm. The medical team arrived 14 minutes later. Afterward, when Yuna had been moved to the bedroom and stabilized, Winnie sat in the chair by the window and waited. She wasn't sure why she waited. She just did. Yuna woke up an hour later, disoriented. Her eyes found Winnie in the chair and went very still. She had clearly expected anyone else. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Yuna looked away, at the wall, and her voice came out rougher than she probably intended. You didn't have to come. I know. After everything, she stopped. Yuna. Winnie's voice was quiet. I'm not here to revisit everything. I'm here because you needed someone calm and I'm calm. That's all. Yuna was silent for a very long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost whatever was usually armored inside it. I thought hurting you would make me feel less invisible, she said. I know how that sounds. Winnie looked at her for a moment. It sounds like someone who's been in pain for a long time and aimed it wrong. Yuna didn't respond. But something in her face broke open slightly, the way old materials do when the temperature finally shifts, not dramatically, just a crack along a line that had been under pressure for years. I'm sorry, she said. Quietly. Without decoration. For the hair. For all of it. Winnie accepted it the same way it was offered, quietly, without performance. I know, she said. The next family dinner was different before it started. Winnie felt it when she walked in, something in the atmosphere that had rearranged itself. Not entirely. Families don't change entirely. But enough. She sat beside Min-jae and the room did not go quiet the way it had that first night. Conversation moved around her naturally. Min-jae's mother asked her a question about the hotel restoration and genuinely listened to the answer. One of the cousins made a joke that included her without explaining itself first. Chairman Kong served her plate before his own wife's, a small gesture that landed in the room and was noted and not discussed. Winnie felt Min-jae's hand find hers briefly under the table. She did not look at him. But she felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't realized was still held tight. It was Yuna who made her look up. She had been quiet most of the dinner. Careful, attentive, sober in a way that was clearly effortful. She had spoken to Winnie twice, once to ask if she wanted more water, once to say that the architectural photographs Min-jae had shown her from the Hanam Grand project were genuinely beautiful. Both times, Winnie had simply replied and moved on and let it be what it was. Then, near the end of the meal, she became aware of movement beside her. She tensed. Every person in the room tensed. The conversation didn't stop, but it slowed, that collective holding of breath that happens when a room is watching something and pretending not to. Yuna reached toward her. Slowly. Deliberately. With full awareness of what the gesture recalled. But her hand didn't grab. Her fingers gently lifted a single curl that had fallen loose across Winnie's cheek and tucked it carefully back. Your hair is beautiful, she said softly. The room exhaled. Not loudly. Not with the dramatic release of a thing resolved. Just the quiet, collective breath of people witnessing something repair itself, imperfectly, partially, humanly, and choosing to believe it. Winnie looked at Yuna for a moment. Then she nodded, once, and turned back to the table. Across from her, Minjae had gone very still. She didn't look at him directly, but she felt it, the particular quality of his stillness, when something moved him that he hadn't expected to be moved by. The stillness that was not cold but full. She reached for her glass. Outside, Seoul hummed and glittered and kept moving. And for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, the room they were in felt like somewhere a family might actually want to stay. It didn't start with love. And it didn't end with revenge. It started with a woman who refused to be disrespected. And a man who learned that silence can be more dangerous than violence. And somehow, that changed everything. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, share, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss any stories. And tell me this, if you were in Winnie's position, would you have stayed calm or made it worse right there in the ballroom?